Hello everyone, I'm Mike Abadi and welcome to VTblogosphereTV. We're at episode number 43 and I am very pleased to welcome Doug Hoffer here today. Doug lives in Burlington. He's a policy analyst and he's a candidate for State Auditor of Accounts. That's the correct title, and he's got the endorsement of the Democratic Party as well as the Progressives. And a host of other, you could probably rattle off a list of people we know. I saw Bill McKibben recently endorsed you. That must have been gratifying. And Doug knows his stuff. He's actually, I invited you on because you've used the blogosphere so well for so many years to kind of cut through the jargon of economics and so much of the conventional wisdom that people run into economics. It can be an area where folks get lost pretty quickly and just say, well, the experts seem to know what they're doing, so I'll pay attention to the stuff I understand. But I've seen you use the blogosphere to really kind of democratize knowledge, and I want to just thank you for that up front.
I appreciate that.
It's just been great to see how you parallel your professional work with actually like, hey people, that's what this means on the ground every day. So Auditor of Accounts. What is it? What is that? What is that role?
A good question. I think it's fair to say most Vermonters can't answer the question, and that's not surprising. It's not supposed to be a high-profile office, in truth. Some auditors are more inclined to seek media attention than others. Nevertheless, the primary functions are to follow the money. You hear the phrase waste, fraud, and abuse, and obviously the auditor has a responsibility to try to identify, or I should say prevent, and if necessary, identify instances of waste, fraud, and abuse. But the two primary responsibilities for many years have been an audit of the state's financial statements and what's called the single audit, which is an audit of federal programs. Programs, I think the threshold is at least $500,000 or more. And that's required by OMB regulations.
The Federal
Yes.
Office of Management and Budget.
Right, every state has to do that. And those responsibilities have for a number of years been done or met by contract with KPMG, which is an independent firm and has a lot of experience in this area, working with the state auditor and the state government. And it may well be a wise decision. If I become auditor, I will review that. They're about to enter a new contract. I think for the most part it's worked well, but you always need to take a look at these things with fresh eyes. Beyond that, each year there are some requests from the legislature for the auditor to look at this program or that because it's of interest to them, or they expect to look at it the subsequent year and they want information.
Sure.
If various agencies or departments don't have internal audit capacity, then they ask the auditor. When all that's done, the auditor has some discretion. There might be some money left in the budget. And at that point, the auditor today, I think it's been going on for about 15 years, looks at performance reviews. They may or may not rise to the level of a formal audit, and that is to say, it's not enough to track the money. About 15 years ago or so, the Government Accounting Standards Board recognized that state auditors had another obligation, and that was to ask the question, are the programs funded with taxpayer monies actually achieving the goals intended by the legislature?
Okay.
Fairly important question.
Right.
And to know, for example, that all the money has been spent as required and that the people who received it were the ones that were supposed to receive it, nothing was stolen, that's okay.
Sure.
But taxpayers want to know, are we getting value for the money? So performance reviews and performance audits are a critical part of the job. And I'm proud to say that when I worked under contract to the state auditor in the 90s, I did some of that work for Ed Flanagan, who, to his credit, raised the bar on that audit and recognized that that was important, and we did some of that, and more is being done now. That's a long answer to your question.
Sure, but you got familiar with the auditor's office by working with them, and what's sort of the scope and scale of there must be state worker staff, and then they farm out. Do you have a sense of the...
Yeah, the staff there are 14 people.
14, okay.
And I think that at least 3 or 4 of them are not auditors or CPAs. They are administrative staff, and certainly some of that is necessary. The others have a range of experience and skills. Most have been there now some time, I believe. I think there's been significant turnover in the numbers folks. I think they've all been hired by the current auditor, if I'm not
Okay.
mistaken.
Who is Tom
Tom
Salmon,
Salmon, yeah.
and he's been in since
He was elected in 06,
06.
re-elected in 08 when he was out of the country, had no opposition. And I ran against him last time and was unsuccessful. So, and he is leaving after this term.
Right, right. And son of a governor.
Indeed.
And I've noticed it's a strange parallel with presidential race 08, where you have this incumbent who's leaving, who's the son of a chief executive, and kind of a maverick Republican on the other side. It's fascinating, probably meaningless parallel, but...
Well, it was a challenge for me as a first-timer. I mean, as a policy wonk, I've been behind the scenes for many years, so it was a challenge to run against a guy with such significant name recognition.
Right.
Two-term incumbent, son of a former governor. That was quite a hurdle.
Right.
I did pretty well, getting 105,000 votes, I
Yeah,
think.
great. I've noticed on the auditor's webpage, the official state webpage, he, and I don't know if he'll continue this tradition, but he seems to have like this, I don't know if it's a monthly show where he kind of, it's called a standing watch, I believe it is.
Yeah.
So he's kind of good with the media and communicating through those forms. I don't know, do you think you'll be continuing the standing watch tradition?
I certainly won't call it standing watch. I will take a look at that as a way to communicate with folks. If it were me, I would want that kind of media distributed throughout the state, not just on his site. For example, on the community access stations that you work with and others.
Yeah, it's a good resource.
Yeah.
And that auditor's website, I wonder if you've probably poked around there and looked at it. Do you find it friendly? Have you thought of what, as someone who's used social media so well, I'm wondering if you thought about how the auditor could use that position to, again, democratize the knowledge of
A couple of things come
economics.
to mind. First of all, transparency. There is a link on his site to a budget presentation from his office to the legislature, but it's very general. There's no specific, very little specific information, and if I'm successful in this race, I will most certainly put the entire budget online.
Okay.
Every bit of it, including all the contracts that are entered into by the auditor, as well as copies of the contracts.
Right, right.
And it's important to do that because very, very few people know where to find information of that nature in the bowels of state government. And for example, last year, the auditor, for reasons known only to him, decided to hire a group out of Chicago to produce a report on alternative revenue streams. Now, you know, we do have Ways and Means and House and Senate Finance. That's their job, as it is the administration. But he got a bug and wanted to do it and spent $15,000
Alternative revenues.
on a no-bid contract, I might add, for a group that does work for mostly Republicans. And you know, some of their recommendations were, well, why not sell ad space on state vehicles? So, you know, it wasn't a terribly useful or helpful document.
Marketing guys are brainstorming.
And it, you know, and it cost $15,000
Right.
in taxpayer money. So whatever, if I'm given the opportunity, whatever I spend money on, you'll be able to find out. That's transparency. Second, in terms of accountability, some audits that have been done the last couple of years are very substantial and I think cost a great deal of money. And that's important because you always want to weigh the costs and the benefits. If you did an audit that cost $120,000 but didn't recover any money or find ways for a department or an agency to save money, then you spent 120 grand. What'd you get for it? And in fact, the auditor has sent some memos, as is required each year, to the Secretary of Administration about broad categories and expenditures. And back to this question of performance auditing, in the last 3 years, the auditor's office spent about $2.4 million on performance auditing. Sounds good. It's important work. It needs to be done. However, if you look at the website, it appears that only, I think, 12 performance audits were done, which means they averaged $200,000 apiece. That's inconceivable. Having worked in the office and knowing what's required, I don't know where the money went, to be honest. So it's a matter of how are you spending the money, what are you getting for it? And you have to audit the auditor.
Right.
I mean, the auditor has to be open to that kind
Who's
of
watching the
review.
Watchmen?
Yeah. So
So that alternative revenue stream study would be an example of
nothing.
Well, it's sort of the discretionary. The legislature didn't ask him. I mean,
No,
most of the auditor's work is legislature saying, if we lowered the tax here and raised it here, how would that shake out? Is that?
Actually, no. That would be done mostly by analysts in the Joint Fiscal Office, which works
Okay.
for the legislature,
Okay,
and the
got
tax
you.
department.
Okay.
Now, having said that, the auditor, after the fact, can, here's one that is of interest to me, for example. I know that over the last few years, the tax department has been given additional resources to hire folks who try to recover more money from taxpayers who are late, not so much late, but there's reason to believe have not met their full obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the IRS estimates a huge amount of money in this country is not paid typically by very wealthy people who have legal ways to shelter money,
Right.
and some maybe not so legal ways, and it requires some work. So if you hire a couple of people and spend, pick a number, 150, 200 grand for 2 top analysts, will their work pay for itself? And the answer is, in other states, is typically yes.
Yeah.
And I would like to know how that's going for the tax department, since they've spent a little bit more money on that. So that's the way the auditor can help.
Okay.
But if there's an analysis of a proposal, that would typically not be done by the auditor, but would be done by JFO or the tax department.
Got you. The auditor is more likely to look at a program that is up and running.
Right.
And now, is it the legislature that typically asks, could you see how this program's doing after 5 years? Or do you get to say, I want to take a look under
A little of both.
that rug?
A little of both. As I say, the auditor does have some discretion with the resources that are not obligated for other purposes. And the staff is there, and to the extent they have the time. The auditor is free to do pretty much whatever he or she wants, in truth, which is kind of interesting. And I know that when I worked for Ed Flanagan, when he was the auditor, he had a good relationship with a number of committee chairs and the leadership, because it was, I think the House was Democratic at the time, and they would feel comfortable saying to him, you know, we're going to be looking at this for the next term. It would be helpful if we had some information about it before then. And there were times when he said to them, I'd like to look at something, you know, ask me to do it.
Right.
But the auditor can do that without being asked.
Sure, sure.
Now, it's gotten to be a little more complicated now, because if the auditor does a substantial piece of work about a department, they can bill that department, which is another reason why the work needs to be watchdogged a little bit in the office itself, not so much from outside. You can't let it just go on, because you don't know going in right now how much value there's going to be to those program managers. You know, the auditor could spend 100 grand and then at the end say, well, we don't have a product that really helped us that much.
So, but human services may be
Build for
that.
Exactly, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
How big do you know how big the auditor's budget, just their in-house budget is?
At this point, I think it's under $4 million, and it's varied from 3.5 to up near 4, depending on the stimulus money, which required more auditing because so much more federal money came in.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure it's in the mid-3s, 3.6, 3.8, in that neighborhood.
Right. So when you were doing studies for the auditor's office, what was the nature of those studies?
I did a number of things. Some were compliance reviews or compliance audits. You know, a program is required to follow certain rules. You have to check, and basically that requires sampling. You go and look at their files. For example, foster care. You know, there's, as you would imagine, very sensitive area, very important area.
Sure.
Not just how successful are they, but are they meeting the federal government and the state government's rules about finding people, checking on their credibility for this very important role. It's just a whole range of stuff, so that would be one. And some performance reviews. In fact, we did the first one that looked at all of state government to find out whether, in fact, they were meeting the requirements of a statute that nobody was paying much attention to, that said, when you submit your budget through the governor, here are some things we want from you. Tell us, do you have a strategic plan? Have you set goals for yourself? Do you have measures to determine whether you've met those goals? And at that time, in the 90s, there hadn't been a lot of leadership around that issue, not much training, so very few departments and agencies did well. And some have picked it up and some have not.
Okay, okay. So why do you actually want to be an auditor?
Well, maybe I should tell you a little bit about how I got here.
Makes sense.
I came to Vermont 24 years ago, right out of law school, to work for Bernie Sanders, who was then mayor of Burlington. I wanted to do policy work. That's why I went to law school, because I thought it would be good preparation for that, and it was. And Peter Clavell was head of CEDO, and had a great experience, worked for them for 5 years and left in '93 and went out on my own.
Community Economic Development Office.
Sorry.
No, that's my job.
That's good. That's good.
I got 3 or 4.
So I left in '93, and shortly thereafter, and went out on my own. Shortly thereafter, got the contract with the state auditor. '95, I think. Another early contract was with the Peace and Justice Center, which engaged me to do what was called the Job Gap Study. And the first one was an opportunity to introduce the concept of the livable wage to the state of Vermont, and I'm proud of that work with Ellen Kaler and a whole bunch of other people, including legislators subsequently. I think we changed the discourse about wages in the state with that work.
Great. And
accomplished some important things. The minimum wage was subsequently increased several times and is now indexed to inflation. The state also increased the earned income tax credits, one of the highest in the country. Those two things alone have helped tens of thousands of low and moderate income people, and it's good work. Subsequent efforts as part of the Job Gap Study included the leaky bucket, which was an effort to quantify the extent of Vermont's dependence on goods and services that we import, sending money out for things that in many cases we used to produce here and could again. And that work, I'm pleased to say, I think provided kind of an intellectual foundation for work that has now blossomed in so many ways, like the Farm to Plate project. A lot of the folks who now promote energy efficiency and renewable energy talk quite openly and appropriately about the economic benefits as well as the energy and environmental benefits. So I've had fun with the Job Gap Study, and subsequently phase 9, yes, there were that many of them, there were 10 actually, was my effort to produce what was called a unified economic development budget. Typically, legislators on the Appropriations Committee have, a dozen people come in from different programs and agencies and departments talking about their piece of a much bigger pie related to economic development. At no point did they see it all together. And the idea was to answer 3 simple questions. How much is spent, for what, and with what outcomes? And that was never done before. So I did it myself, and then I got the legislature, or thanks to Mark Larson, who was then vice chair of House Appropriations, and his chair, Martha Heath, they got it in statute. And they did it for a number of years, and the first 2 questions were easy to answer. How much did we spend and for what? The third, a little more difficult, and unfortunately, the Agency of Commerce did not do well during the Douglas administration. And I'm very disappointed to know from last year that the entire thing was eliminated. And my opponent had something to do with that, unfortunately. But so I had a lot of fun.
The legislature just voted not to fund it? Is that?
No, just to eliminate the requirement for it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right. So that kind of work has been my bailiwick all this time. I'm a numbers guy. To some extent, this is a numbers job. There's more to it than that. My skill set is a natural fit. It's the only job of interest to me in state government, frankly. At this point in my career, I'm not beginning a political career.
Right,
I just want to, like all the people who work in the public interest, want to have a positive impact. And I think I have done that, but I think I can do more as state auditor.
I've just picking up on what you were saying about the minimum wage in our state. I saw recently an article that states with higher minimum wages have fared better in this recession because there's, people are having, even minimum wage workers are having that much more money in their pocket to just generate, maintain a functioning economy. The bottom doesn't fall out as easily, which is, it seems as though in the world of economics, the conventional wisdom is you raise the minimum wage, you've got to fire half your workforce. So that work.
Well, there were a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions. It was suggested through the years, each time this issue came up, that, hey, it's only teenagers, which is grossly
right, summer workers,
untrue. If we do that, then those businesses, it would result in fewer low-wage jobs, and there's no evidence that it has. Many of the things that the opponents have said about these issues have turned out to be false, as is the case with all the talk all those years about Vermont being anti-business.
Right. Yeah, we're faring, okay. We're certainly not celebrating any boom times, but we're not looking so.
Well, let's face it, everybody's got problems. We've lost millions and millions of jobs overseas, good manufacturing jobs, which was always important because it was a way for people who were not necessarily on a college track to get a decent job. And for reasons that are obvious, we lost many, many millions of jobs, which in a way, if you look at the numbers, which is what I've done, it puts the lie to this notion that, well, Vermont has lost all these jobs. Well, even states with lower manufacturing wages have lost these jobs. Because if you can pay $2 a day, it doesn't matter whether you're in South Carolina, Arizona, or Vermont.
Right.
The
No one's
savings are
competing with
immense.
that in the U.S. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the same for electric costs and a lot of the other things that people have suggested are critical. They're important. You have to watch all these costs. But the bottom line is you can't compete the way trade policy is right now with countries that pay those wages.
Right, right. So as you would be looking at whether taxpayers are getting the bang for their buck, you're going to need some criteria to determine that. And it seems there's probably an economic, just straight numbers, but also values must come into play.
Well, it would, as a rule, it would not be the auditor's task to evaluate the Vermont economy. That is what the legislature pays Tom Cavett to do and the governor pays Jeff Carr to do. And they together issue a joint report several times a year. That's their job.
Right.
My job would be to look at the programs that are funded with the monies raised.
Right.
And I think it's particularly important because there's, in my view, a lot of the money spent here and in other states, not just Vermont, on programs that we've come to accept as a core part of the process are not terribly effective.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, even when I say that and they go, yeah, you're probably right, then they don't cut them. Or I don't want them to cut them, I want to reallocate the resources. That's the point. If it's determined, whether it's economic development or any other program or program area, if in fact the choices made by the legislature have not produced the results that they desired or anticipated, then they need to know that so that they can make more informed decisions. Oh, that didn't work, let's try something else.
Sure.
And unfortunately, while I think most of the people at the top level in the administration care about this issue, they have to, the program managers and the appointed officials, they're busy. And if you don't set aside the money up front and you don't designate someone or some group of people to do that as a regular thing, then you won't have that information. Mm-hmm. And to the extent they don't have it, the auditor can help.
Right. Vermont is, well, not getting ready, is in the midst of a great experiment for a U.S. state in terms of single-payer health care.
Indeed.
And I'm wondering if you're already formulating questions that an auditor is going to need to be asking as this structure is built and gets up and running in the next 5, 6, 7 years.
Well, yes. I don't want to go into the specifics, but I think it's clear that for folks who might say, gosh, I don't know much about that job, I don't know him, I don't know the other guy, who cares, what difference does it make? First of all, that's not true, but in this case, I think the outcome of this race does matter, and I'll tell you why very briefly. My opponent does not support the governor's proposal and the plan adopted by the legislature. And I have no crystal ball, but it's entirely possible that someone in this job could kind of muck up the works. And clearly, the auditor has to be independent, must be truly independent. The auditor does not work for the governor, or the administration does not work for the legislature. Having said that, the auditor can, and in some cases should, work in partnership with both those parties to ask the tough questions and provide information that adds value to their deliberations.
Right.
But if somebody comes in and is not looking to add value, but to slow down the process or muck up the works, that could happen.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting my opponent would do that, but in theory it could.
Right, right. I guess there'll be a 5-member board, I believe.
There is.
There is. It's
Yeah.
up and running, and
There are two many tasks. I mean, they have to, with a lot of help, of course, design the program so that we will know what the benefits will be. They have to, along with the legislature, obviously, determine how it is to be funded. I mean, these are massive questions
Right, right.
That will have enormous impacts on families and businesses, large and small, and nonprofits, and everybody in the state. But the system already has massive impacts on all of us. It's costing us almost 20% of the entire GDP of the state.
Sure.
And it's not working as well as it should. So
Yeah.
it's a very big deal.
Right.
We're early in the process, although there are some who would say, give us all the answers today. Well, we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
They're working on it. First, we have to deal with the federal mandates. And as that's happening, they're working on answering these other questions.
Right.
But the auditor, I'm not sure the auditor has a role to play until we get further down the road, a couple of years maybe.
Where it's built, and then you can assess how effective
Right.
is it, or where may it be leaking money, or where.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the outcomes.
Right.
You know.
Right. That's, yeah, intersection of dollars and values there in healthcare, definitely. The campaign is for Auditor of Accounts is actually getting headlines, which, you know, who would have thought? And it seems to be this trooper overtime issue. Your opponent suggested $100,000. He already put a price tag on how much the study would go.
Yeah.
I'm going to share why that story is got some legs to it.
Well, there's a couple of pieces to this. Both the current auditor and my opponent weighed in on this one. Yeah, clearly, I would say the auditor could and perhaps should have a role to play here. There's a lot of parties. The Secretary of Administration is working on it, the agency or the department itself. Everybody's trying to dig in and find out the extent of the problem. The auditor said, well, we'll get in there and we'll spend $100,000 on an independent review of the whole state. Well, I made a public records request of the auditor's office when I heard that and said, oh, that's interesting. Have you developed an RFP? Is it out? If so, can I see the results? And I was told that there was no RFP, that we're having discussions internally. So I think he jumped the gun a little bit.
This is the present auditor.
The current auditor,
yeah.
Jumped the gun a little bit. And to say how much it's going to cost is kind of interesting because he doesn't tell us what the other audits cost. All the ones that have been done during his tenure, he's never told us how much those cost.
Didn't lead with the price tag on those.
No. The other thing is that my opponent came up and had a 3-point plan. And you may recall that got a little press. But as it turns out, the two that are relevant to the situation reflect directives that are already in the Human Resources Guidelines manual.
And he was proposing them as these bold initiatives to fix the problem.
I was a little surprised by that. But even more important than apparently him not doing his homework on this issue is that that's not what an auditor does. An auditor, in response to a legitimate concern by the people in the state government, doesn't rush out and say, I've got the answer. The auditor is supposed to spend some time formulating an audit plan, go into the files, and do the real work of an auditor. When the information is available and it's analyzed, then the auditor, in a report, publishes his or her findings.
Right.
And it is from those findings that are based on evidence that there are recommendations. You don't start with the recommendations.
Right. So that's a window into how an Aluzzi auditorship may function, and it seems to be the salmon auditorship has functioned.
Right.
I know he's. I guess because it may be just, I don't know, a sort of more of a staid position, S-T-A-I-D, that there may be a desire to grab a headline that seems to be that instinct to like, oh, Vermont Yankee, what can I say about how much the lawyers cost? I mean, it just...
Well, that goes way back, in fact. The legislature, when considering this early in the game, considering a number of issues related to Vermont Yankee, in I think 2007, asked the auditor, actually there were 5 state senators and a couple of state reps, asked the auditor to look at the decommissioning fund. Mm-hmm. And then was having a lot of debates about other related issues. Well, during that period, oddly, officials, very high officials of Entergy came and visited the state auditor. Now, anyone is entitled to talk to the state auditor, but having been asked to do this work and with all the work going on in the State House, I might have said, it's not appropriate for us to talk.
Now's not the time.
I mean, basically, what are you coming here for, to lobby me?
Right.
Interestingly, that very same day, the auditor sent a letter to the legislature pretty much making the case for Entergy. So I can assure voters that that's not the way I'm going to do my business.
Right.
It's got to be based on the evidence, and the evidence comes from the work of the staff, and hopefully I'll work alongside them as best I can.
Yeah, and you can't be driven by the latest headline because there's going to be some,
Now, having said that, all auditors, I mean, we've had a number of people prior. As I said, I think Ed really raised the bar, Ed Flanagan. Mm-hmm. And Ed was a politician and liked headlines like anybody else. And he would, battle it out with the governor. His successor, Liz Reedy, a Democrat who's supporting my opponent, unfortunately, also, having had a long career in the state Senate, was not immune to the lure of the headline. Her successor, Randy Brock, not so much.
A one-term or a quick term?
Actually,
was it?
2.
Was it 2?
Liz was 2. Randy was 2. Okay. Randy lost to Tom, and of course, you remember he had the recount. But Randy wasn't as much of a headline guy. I mean, that work was closer to his professional skill set.
Right, right.
Although I don't think he went as far with the office as he might have, talking about the performance stuff.
Sure, sure.
He was certainly very competent, did a good job, but he wasn't as much a headline. Tom likes headlines.
Yeah. Yeah, and you'll get it back to be all about.
You know, if there's important issues and we have important information, it's not just for policymakers. Performance auditing should be essential for the program managers themselves. If we can provide information that will help them run their programs more efficiently and effectively, they need it. Policymakers need it to make more informed decisions about how to allocate scarce resources, but the voters need that information as well. They don't have to know about 27, programs every year, but a handful each time. This is how the legislature decided to spend your money, and this is what you're getting for it. So you don't have to seek headlines, but you want to share that information and reach people with it.
Right.
Furthermore, in a way that they can understand. Back to transparency, I would very much like to, and I will promise that every report that goes out, we will attempt, with varying degrees of success, no doubt, to have a summary in plain
Everyday
English
language
for lay people who may not be familiar with the jargon.
Hallelujah. Thank you. Wow, I appreciate the time.
Oh, my pleasure.
You are ready.
Thanks for that.
And I'm wishing you a lot of luck. You don't have to worry about
Thank you.
primary day.
No, I
But November, what's the
6th.
6th, thank you.
Yeah.
First Tuesday in November, people. But don't skip primary day either, August 28th. Get out there. And yes, I hope this helped you make an informed choice. Much appreciated, Doug.
My pleasure. Thank you, man.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Night.
Kinds of questions before in my early press conferences. I can't remember exactly the question, but I do remember the tone about people saying, how can you possibly get tax cuts through the Congress when so-and-so said that they shouldn't be done, or such and such said this, or this report said that, or American people didn't want this. And so I am heartened by past experiences to believe that it is possible to do big things